Good evening and welcome to News Review. The Foreign Office has accused Spain of trying to use EU discussions over the Single Skies framework to force sovereignty negotiations on Gibraltar. The Chief Minister has classed the Spanish government as desperate for trying to suggest that it's achieved the exclusion of Gibraltar, while Conservative MEP Julie Girling has said such an exclusion would be unthinkable.
In a statement, the FCO says it's clear that the UK will never enter into a process of sovereignty negotiations with which Gibraltar is not content. It therefore says the EU has no recourse but to reflect its own legal statutes and apply the aviation legislation to Gibraltar. The FCO adds it reserves its position on the lawfulness of any other outcome and on its response, which could include pursuing legal proceedings. Until the text of the new legislation is resolved and adopted, it says, the existing legislation, which includes Gibraltar, continues to apply. For his part, the Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, says his government does not for one moment countenance that Gibraltar will be excluded from the Single Skies measure. He goes on to say that Spain will have a hard time persuading the European Union that Gibraltar, required to comply with all EU laws, might somehow not be subject to the benefits of European air liberalisation.
The position at the moment is that the Cordoba language text is in the measure that is going forward. It's in square brackets. That's what's happening. That is the text which has been highlighted by the Italian presidency, and they've asked the United Kingdom and Spain to try and deal with the issue in a way that doesn't delay the measure. But the absence of an agreement between the United Kingdom and Spain will not mean that Gibraltar is suspended. It will mean that the measure will not be going ahead, and therefore it will be Spain that will be under pressure to have to explain why she wants to change text which is agreed by the Kingdom of Spain in the Cordoba Agreement, by the United Kingdom and by the Commission as the right text to go into European aviation measures.
Mr. Picardo says that Spain cannot cherry-pick elements of the Cordoba Agreement it agrees with, while the UK and Gibraltar comply with their obligations. He adds it shows Spain is acting in an unconscionable way, holding up a measure which would benefit over 520 million people because of a medieval claim to Gibraltar, a view echoed by Conservative MEP for Gibraltar, Julie Girling.
It will not get through. The issue really for the other member states, let's say, there's Spain and there's UK very interested in this issue, then there are 26 others who have a marginal interest. And what we're saying to those 26 others is, your interest may have been marginal up to now, but now it's affecting you, because if this agreement doesn't go through for this reason, you will be saying to your citizens you've got to pay more for your flights, it's going to cost more in terms of carbon, etc. So in some ways, it sounds a terrible thing to say, but I rather welcome it, because it will make those other member states sit up and think not just about this issue but about all the others. And I'm absolutely convinced that our government is going to stand firm on this and will get a result.
The Foreign Office says an important piece of EU aviation legislation has been delayed because of Spanish political point scoring, adding it's difficult to see how anyone can view this as a victory.
Meanwhile, the Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Minister raised Gibraltar issues with the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons. Mr. Picardo spoke of this week's 5-hour border delays, adding this was a day that saw Spanish state vessels enter British Gibraltar territorial waters 7 times. The Chief Minister also opened the plenary session of the Joint Ministerial Council together with the Minister for Overseas Territories, James Durridge. Mr. Picardo said the overseas territories generally welcomed the positive approach taken by the coalition government. He said there was prosperity in some territories and much potential in others. But there were issues and problems still to discuss, adding the relationship should be one of equals working together in partnership. Also this week, with all flats at Monscalpe Mews and Beachview Terraces now allocated, the government said it is planning 2 further housing projects, the first opposite Water Gardens and the second on the East Side Reclamation.
In late 2011, the GSLP Liberals promised the electorate they would provide hundreds of new homes at affordable prices if elected, which of course they were. Construction for their first 2 housing schemes is well underway, and a total of 895 flats have already been allocated. including 477 three-bedroom flats and 312 two-bedroom flats. The housing waiting list guided allocation, with priority given to those on the list at the time of the last general election. Those who missed out on Mondscalpe Mews and Beachview Terraces will be excited to hear the government's ideas for its next two housing projects.
This is designed to continue the process of breaking the back of the housing list that we inherited. This will not be one housing estate. This is likely to be two different sites. We'll be making a lot more detail public soon, but the importance of making this announcement today is that we have just finished the sale of the properties that GRP was handling for the government in respect of the Mondscalpe and Beachview Terraces flats. We're therefore now telling people who have not succeeded in respect of those particular housing estates that there are two more projects coming. They're coming very quickly. Everybody will shortly be written to who have not been rang. Anybody who submitted an application and has not been rung to come and buy one of the properties will now receive correspondence from GRP telling them that there are two more projects to come, asking them if they continue to be interested, and asking them what type of composition of flat, the size of rooms, etc., they are likely to be interested in, so that we can plan these estates in order to attempt to provide for people the types of homes that they need and wish.
The land just north of Varelbeg Estate, opposite Water Gardens, could soon be home to 500 new flats. A number of government entities, including HM Customs, would need to be relocated to allow for these. In a statement, the government says the second proposal, that will in due course be submitted to the Development and Planning Commission for advice and guidance only, will be a scheme for 1,000 flats on the East Side Reclamation.
We will be dealing also not just with people on the housing list, but also people who are already government tenants, who are saying to the government, there's a very large number of them, I will happily leave the government tenancy that I have and purchase a property in co-ownership with the government and leave you my existing property in order to be able to use that for people on the housing waiting list who wish to rent.
The Chief Minister says his government is keen to avoid the mistakes of the past by continuing to prioritise the construction of affordable homes so that everyone eligible who wants one of these flats is able to obtain one.
The longest-serving Minister for Europe with responsibility for Gibraltar held his last head-to-head meeting with the Chief Minister before the UK Cabinet dissolves ahead of the general election. Mr Picardo described David Lidington as a staunch supporter and friend of the ROC and vows to continue lobbying efforts when his successor is known.
Ministers for Europe have come and gone over the years, and some have lasted only months before being moved on to other pastures, yet David Lidington has endured throughout the length of the Conservative Lib Dem coalition's term of office, a factor which has lended some stability to Gibraltar in otherwise unstable times. The Chief Minister has described him as a good friend and supporter of Gibraltar and believes the failure to resolve certain matters has not been for want of Mr Lidington's support.
He has now passed Douglas Hurd in the record period in which he has been Minister for Europe. He's held the post since he was elected in May 2010, almost 5 years, the longest serving Minister for Europe, and I think on balance a strong friend of Gibraltar. Of course, there are issues that are still pending. There will always be issues that need to be dealt with, and David Lidington has not been able to resolve them all. But in the work that he and I have done together in the past 3 years, I think we can point to certain important achievements which reflect on the fact that working together with the United Kingdom, we've been able to achieve more than if we'd set out to simply continue a process of confrontation with the UK.
Mr Picardo is gearing up for a series of meetings with the overseas territories, which will have on the agenda, among other things, the protection of British territorial waters throughout the world, but particularly in Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands, both of whom face aggressive incursions from hostile neighbours.
Well, tomorrow's meeting of the Joint Ministerial Conference will involve not just the leaders of the overseas territories, the chief ministers and premiers of each of the territories gathered in London, but also a representation of ministers from the United Kingdom. And one of the subjects that will be considered will be the security of the territorial waters of all of the territories. And of course, as you rightly point out, it's the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar that are usually the ones in the headlines in relation to these issues. But a lot of work goes on in the waters around the other overseas territories, for example, in the Caribbean, in dealing with issues related to the smuggling smuggling of drugs in that area, etc. So this will be an issue that will encompass not just challenges to sovereignty, but also all the exercises of jurisdiction and control that the territories and the United Kingdom together play out in the jurisdictional waters of each of the overseas territories.
Mr. Picardo is currently the president of the UK OTA, which has sent 50 delegates to London, comprising representatives of 12 territories.
The government this week welcomed an admission by Spanish authorities to the European Commission that they're responsible for the sewage problem affecting Western Beach. The government says this is after it made extensive submissions to the Commission, indicating that Spain was the source of the pollution. It adds the evidence it sent to the Commission included records of water sampling and plans of Gibraltar's discharge system. The government was reacting to the Spanish authorities' admission that the pollution may be caused by inadequate maintenance of the collecting system and the pumping stations, as well as uncontrolled inputs of wastewater to the rainwater collecting system. The government says it's also welcomed a commitment by the European Commission to follow up the Spanish authorities' efforts to solve the problem, including a €6.5 million project to monitor discharge points and remove wastewater. And we'll be back with more of this week's news after this break.